I just finished this really cute little book and I want to talk about it. It is called Here There Be Dragons by James A. Owen. I had never heard of this book or this author. I was looking at books at Goodwill and this spine sticking out, this cover art, the name of the book, everything about it looked so interesting. Before buying it, I looked it up really quick and it seemed to have like differing opinions on how good it was, and I think I know why there are those differing opinions. I really enjoyed it, and so I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to try to keep it pretty spoiler free. It is less than 20 years old. I have come to decide that that's like my cutoff point for how willing I am to just spoil a book. 20 years seems pretty fair. Anyway, this one came out in 2006. It is what feels like a middle grade fantasy, very reminiscent of like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I think it's very purposefully supposed to give those vibes. It takes place during World War I, starting in London. It's kind of a portal fantasy. There's the real world that we live in, and then there's the magical lands. Like every magical land you have ever read of, from fantasy, from myth, from legend, they all exist, and they're each their own island. And so the characters are able to sail on their dragon ship from island to island to these magical places that you have read of. And part of why I think it gets differing reviews on how good it is because it's not necessarily super clear who the intended audience is. It reads to me like a children's fantasy written for adults. As an adult, I really enjoyed it. It felt kind of like going back to read a book I should have read as a kid, but I'm reading now. The main characters are all adults. I think the youngest character is 19, and then the rest are older. Some of them are still like young adults, but you're not following children like in the Chronicles of Narnia. And then a couple of things made it feel a little weird for it to be geared towards children. One of the main characters had been a soldier and was suffering from pretty severe shell shock, PTSD. He had a couple of episodes during this story. And then the other reason it felt like it wasn't necessarily geared towards children is because it feels like you're expected to have already read some of the classic fantasy stories. You're expected to have some knowledge of the classic myths, like Jason and the Argonauts, The Lord of the Rings, things that kids might not know about, but as an adult who likes fantasy and fairy tale stories, you probably have knowledge of. And so when you're reading this, there's a lot of little details, little Easter egg kind of stuff that you're reading through and you recognize like, oh, I know that place name, or I can see where this idea is pulled from another book that I read as a kid or as an adult. So this is book one in a series. I enjoyed it enough that I might collect the rest of the series to read. They're also just beautiful and would look really good on my bookshelf. The name of the series is The Chronicles of, reminiscent of Narnia, the Imaginarium Geographica. So this book, the Imaginarium Geographica, which they just refer to as the Geographica, is this log book, map book. The magical lands, the islands that you can visit, are very difficult to navigate. And so this book, the Geographica, has a caretaker, traditionally a group of 3 caretakers. They travel the islands, mapping them, but they're also the guardians of the Geographica. And in this book, there are some magical villains who want to steal the Geographica for their own villainous plans. And so there are 3 characters from our real world who get drawn into this adventure, this quest. They meet characters along the way, some of which they recognize. At the point of World War I, where these characters are from, they encounter some characters and some lands from stories that they're familiar with. And then for us as readers, we follow them, those 3 main characters, encountering things in that magical land that we can see inspiration of in stories that were written between World War I and now. Because those 3 characters that we're following are not just anybody. They are people with names that you might recognize once you get to the end of the book and it is revealed who you've been reading about this whole time. So on one hand, it could feel like James A. Owen is just stealing ideas from all these other stories, or you could say he's taking elements from all these stories into one story for fantasy fans to feel like they're getting a little bit of everything. And it was just kind of a light, fun fantasy adventure, recognizable elements. It was a easy read. It never went super deep, but it did have enough character growth, things that those characters were struggling with and had to overcome to make me happy as a character-driven reader. And as far as like overall feelings when I was reading it, I also recently read A Wizard of Earthsea. There were some things that were super similar, the traveling amongst islands, the audience that it was targeted for, but A Wizard of Earthsea gave me like dark, creepy feelings, and this one gave me more of the like fun, adventure-y feelings, kind of taking me back to childhood fantasy and fairy tales and stuff. So I'm going to say that it's not like this masterpiece. It's not the most wonderfully written thing I've read all year, but I think it's going to be one of my favorites because I enjoyed reading it. It was also a really good palate cleanser for me to read in amongst all the like bigger adult epic fantasy that I've been reading. And I have a lot more large epic fantasy to read the rest of this year. And so reading this just children's fairy tale inspired book in between all those bigger books was really nice. It's also a good feeling to pick up a random book that you've never heard of and enjoy it. Because before this one, I read 2 other books that I had never heard of and I didn't enjoy them as much. So this was nice. I hope I was able to make this book seem interesting. I know my thoughts were pretty opinion-based, and you'll have to let me know if you decide you want to try it. Thank you to my patrons for your support. Happy reading. Bye. Here There Be Dragons